History Explained. The 1920s. The Roaring Twenties. Jizz. Bootleggers. Prosperity. But beneath the surface, a cancer was growing. A cancer of oil, cash, and corruption so deep it would reach the White House itself. Before Watergate, before Iran-Contra, there was Teapot Dome. It was the largest political corruption scandal in American history, and it started with a $100,000 bribe in a brown paper bag. A president bought by oil money. A cabinet secretary who sold the nation's secrets. Two oil tycoons who thought they could buy anything, including the United States Navy. And at the center of it all, a teapot-shaped rock in Wyoming that became a synonym for corruption. These history facts reveal the untold history of the scandal that taught America how to steal. The hidden history of big oil, bribes, and the Marines with carbines. This is History Explained. Let's begin. The year is 1920. America is exhausted. Bled by a world war, shaken by a pandemic, and tired of Woodrow Wilson's rigid idealism, the nation is looking for an exit. They find it in Warren G. Harding, a handsome, genial senator from Ohio with a booming voice and a simple promise. He offers a return to normalcy. It was a made-up word, but for a weary public, it meant the government would finally stop asking for sacrifices and start looking the other way. Warren G. Harding wasn't a brilliant man, and he was the first to admit it. He once confessed to a friend, "I am not fit for this office and never should have been here." But in the dawning age of mass media, Harding had the one thing talent couldn't buy. He looked like a president. Tall, silver-haired, and impeccably poised, he was the perfect hollow vessel. In 1920, for a nation craving stability over substance, looking the part was enough. Harding's path to power wasn't paved by the voters, it was paved in the dark. During the 1920 convention, the public process stalled. The real decision happened at 2 a.m. in a smoke-filled suite at Chicago's Blackstone Hotel. There, a handful of party bosses, fueled by oil interests and banking titans, handpicked their man. Harding didn't win the nomination. He was installed by the very men who would soon come to collect the bill. The man who bought Harding's ticket to the White House was Jake Hammond, an Oklahoma oil kingpin. He funneled a staggering $1 million in crude-backed cash to the Republican machine, a massive down payment on future favors. But Hammond would never see the payout. Just weeks before Harding's inauguration, Hammond's mistress ended the arrangement with a pistol. He died in a pool of oil and scandal, leaving the seat at the table wide open. Harding didn't just win, he obliterated the opposition in one of the largest landslides in American history. To the public, he was the face of normalcy and peace. But behind the curtain, the new president was a man owned. His victory had been bought on credit, fueled by secret loans from the nation's most powerful interests. Before he even took the oath of office, the bills were coming due, and the lenders were ready to collect. To settle the debt, Harding chose Albert Fall, a grizzled frontiersman with a sharp mustache and an even sharper disdain for the environment. Fall didn't believe in conservation. He viewed public lands as untapped ATMs for private interests. When Harding appointed him Secretary of the Interior, the nation's natural resources were handed to a man who wanted to sell them off. The fox was finally in the henhouse, and the heist was officially on. Albert Bacon Fall was a man ripped from the pages of a Western pulp novel. Born in Kentucky and forged on the New Mexico frontier, he carved out a reputation as a ruthless trial lawyer. Fall didn't represent the law, He represented the defiant, defending outlaws, cattle barons, and anyone nursing a grudge against federal authority. He spent his life fighting the government from the outside. Now, he was about to dismantle it from within. In an age where warships were ditching coal for oil, the U.S. Navy was desperate for a secure fuel supply. To guarantee it, previous presidents had locked away 3 massive oil reserves, strictly for military use. These weren't just fields, they were the nation's strategic insurance policy. By law, they were untouchable, protected from corporate greed and off-limits to any private lease without the explicit, public blessing of the United States Congress. Albert Fall knew the law was a lock, so he simply moved the door. In 1921, he maneuvered an unsuspecting President Harding into signing an executive order, stripping the Navy of its oil and handing total control to Fall's own Interior Department. There was no debate, no public hearing, and no congressional oversight. With a single, silent stroke of a pen, the nation's strategic energy security was signed over to the fox in the henhouse. The Navy was blindsided, and conservationists were screaming foul, but Albert Fall was unmoved. He had successfully hijacked the nation's emergency fuel tank. For the first time in history, the Secretary of the Interior held the keys to the most lucrative oil fields on Earth. Fall didn't see a military asset or a protected landscape. He saw his personal leverage. The pieces were all on the board, and he was finally ready to start selling. The first man to knock on Fall's door was Edward Doheny, a titan who had practically invented the California oil boom. Back in 1892, he'd struck black gold in the heart of Los Angeles with little more than a hand drill and a hunch. By 1921, Doheny wasn't just an oil man, he was a legend, sitting atop a mountain of wealth and looking for his next big score. He had the money and Fall had the reserves. In November 1921, the heist went from theory to felony. Inside Fall's private Washington residence, Edward Doheny delivered a loan that required no paperwork, a simple brown paper bag stuffed with $100,000 in cash. In exchange for that bundle of bills, Fall handed over the keys to the Elk Hills Naval Reserve in California. No competitive bidding, no public notice, just a cold, hard transaction that sold out the Navy for a bag of loot. If Doheny was the elder statesman of oil, Harry Sinclair was its high-stakes gambler. A man who rose from a Kansas pharmacy to the heights of Wall Street, Sinclair had built an empire on grit and gut instinct. He didn't just want oil, he wanted the crown jewel of the Naval Reserves, a formation in Wyoming known as Teapot Dome. Sinclair was a risk-taker who knew that in Washington, the biggest payoffs required the boldest bets. In April 1922, the second hammer fell. Albert Fall signed over the legendary Teapot Dome Reserve to Sinclair's aptly named Mammoth Oil Company. The contract was a corporate dream, terms so lopsided they bordered on the surreal. In exchange, the secretary's personal fortune exploded. Sinclair funneled $300,000 to Fall, delivered not just in cash and bonds, but in a bizarre tribute of high-end livestock for Fall's New Mexico ranch. Albert Fall didn't hide his new fortune, he flaunted it. He poured the bribe money into his sprawling New Mexico ranch, installing modern irrigation and prize cattle for all to see. In his mind, he wasn't a criminal, he was a pioneer. He believed the nation's resources were there to be exploited, and as the man who opened the door for industry, he was simply taking his rightful cut of the American dream. In Washington, silence is expensive, but secrets are impossible to keep. The man who would eventually pull the thread on Albert Fall wasn't a federal agent or a crusading prosecutor. He was a local newspaper editor with a long memory and a personal grudge. While the White House looked the other way, this lone journalist began digging into the sudden, unexplained wealth of the man from New Mexico, proving that a single pen could be deadlier than a scandal. Enter Frederick Bonefice, the ruthless co-owner of the Denver Post. Bonefice wasn't interested in the truth, he was interested in leverage. A notorious blackmailer who had built an empire by shredding political careers, he caught the scent of the Teapot Dome deal. For Bonefice, the rumors of secret leases weren't just a story, they were a golden opportunity to squeeze the most powerful men in Washington until they bled. The rumors found a voice when a disgruntled oil man named Louis Burke walked into the Denver Post. Burke wasn't just talking, he was selling. He claimed Albert Fall had sold out the naval reserves for cold, hard cash, and he had the evidence to back it up. For a shark like Bonefice, Burke was the ultimate weapon. A man with a grudge, a paper trail, and a story that could set the entire Republican Party on fire. Frederick Bonefice took the evidence, paid the $2,000 fee, and then did nothing. He didn't print a single word. Instead, the newspaper man turned blackmailer, using the smoking gun documents to tighten a noose around Albert Fall. Bonefice wasn't looking for a Pulitzer, he was looking for a payout. He held the scandal over the secretary's head, betting that Fall would pay any price to keep Teapot Dome in the dark. The deal was simple. Fall would use his power to grease the wheels for Bonefice's other ventures, and in exchange, the Teapot Dome secret would stay buried. But Fall, ever the stubborn frontiersman, refused to be cowed. It was a fatal miscalculation. Realizing he couldn't control the secretary, Bonefice did what every jilted blackmailer does. He burned it all down. He unleashed the story on the front page, and the quiet heist became a national firestorm. In April 1922, the Denver Post pulled the pin and dropped a grenade on Washington. The headlines were a death knell. Albert Fall had secretly auctioned off the Navy's lifeblood to the highest bidder. No competition. No public oversight. No congressional permission. It was a brazen backroom betrayal of the American people, laid bare on the front page for the world to see. The scandal of the century had officially begun. The Denver Post may have lit the spark, but the rest of the country's press poured on the gasoline. Within weeks, the Teapot Dome story had leaped from Colorado to New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. By the summer of 1922, it wasn't just a headline, it was a national obsession. From dinner tables to the halls of power, every American was asking the same question. Who owned the government and how much did it cost? President Warren G. Harding was a man adrift. He had handed his trust to a friend, only to watch that friendship turn into a political anchor. Publicly, Harding played the part of the defiant leader, denying every charge and insisting the leases were ironclad. But behind the closed doors of the Oval Office, the mask was slipping. The weight of the betrayal was crushing him, and the president was quietly falling apart. While the headlines roared in D.C., a literal showdown was brewing in the Wyoming dust. The government issued a cease and desist, ordering Sinclair's crews to stop drilling at Teapot Dome. But Harry Sinclair wasn't a man who took orders from bureaucrats. He dug in his heels and defied the feds, keeping the drills turning in a high-stakes game of chicken that pushed the scandal from a legal dispute to the brink of armed conflict. Washington's response was swift and literal. They sent in the Marines. Captain George Schuler and a four-man fire team arrived in the Wyoming desert, armed to the teeth with carbines, sidearms, and a grim determination. This wasn't a legal summons, it was a military intervention. Their orders were clear: march onto Sinclair's land, face down the Roughnecks, and shut the Teapot Dome drilling operations down by any means necessary. The high noon showdown in the desert didn't end with a gunfight, it ended with an invitation. When the Marines stormed the site, rifles in hand, they were met not by an army, but by a single oil rig and a foreman who didn't even blink. He took one look at the armed soldiers and, according to the official records, simply asked if they'd like to stay for lunch. It was the most polite standoff in American military history. The foreman's message was a masterclass in passive resistance. "I'm just a guy doing a job." He told the Marines he didn't have the authority to stop the pumps, and he wasn't going to help them try. If the United States military wanted to shut down the rig, they'd have to get their own hands dirty. It was a bizarre scene, soldiers in uniform, forced to figure out the mechanics of an industrial oil pump to enforce the law of the land. The Marines left behind a few "no trespassing" signs, a silent warning in the Wyoming wind. For a moment, the pumps went quiet, but the victory was an illusion. Within days, Sinclair's crews were back, the drills screaming once more. The soldiers were trapped in a legal vacuum. They could post signs and stare down roughnecks, but without an order to open fire, the United States military was powerless to stop the flow of stolen oil. For weeks, it was a battle of wills in the high desert, the law versus the lure of profit. But in the end, the government was the one to blink. Harry Sinclair finally agreed to silence his drills, but not without one last insult to the feds. He demanded, and received, a promise that the very government trying to seize his lease would now act as his private security, guarding his expensive equipment from vandals. The predator had successfully turned his pursuers into his watchdogs. The War of Teapot Dome quickly became a national laughingstock. Editorial cartoonists lampooned the standoff, sketching Marines in battle gear being served tea by oil-slicked roughnecks. But beneath the jokes lay a dark, constitutional crisis. The United States had deployed armed troops to the desert to settle a backroom bribe. The farce was funny to the public, but to the oil men, it was proof they were now more powerful than the law. In October 1923, the games ended and the hunt began. The Senate launched a formal inquiry led by Montana's Thomas Walsh, a man of iron will and surgical precision. Walsh wasn't looking for headlines, he was looking for blood. He was a relentless investigator who couldn't be bought, bullied, or intimidated. Walsh cast a wide net, subpoenaing Fall, Doheny, and Sinclair alongside a parade of witnesses. He demanded every ledger and every testimony, but he was met with a stone wall. The titans of oil and politics offered nothing but hollow stares and strategic silence, betting they could outlast the senator's resolve. Albert Fall took the stand not as a statesman, but as a suspect. Faced with Walsh's interrogation, the former secretary immediately retreated behind the Fifth Amendment. He refused to utter a single word about the secret leases, the hidden bribes, or the sudden, unexplained fortune that had transformed his ranch into an empire. Edward Doheny followed suit, hiding behind the Fifth, until he dropped a bombshell. He claimed the $100,000 wasn't a bribe, but a simple loan between friends. But when Walsh asked why $100,000 in cash was delivered in a literal brown paper bag, the oil tycoon's confidence vanished. He had no answer, and the loan story began to unravel. Harry Sinclair didn't just deflect, he declared war on the committee. He invoked the Fifth Amendment over 70 times, turning his testimony into a broken record of defiance. He clutched his company's secrets like a crown jewel, refusing to hand over a single ledger, betting that his wall of silence was taller than the law itself. The Senate finally lost its patience. Harry Sinclair was held in contempt, slapped with handcuffs, and hauled off to a jail cell. It was a stunning fall for the oil king, but even the cold bars of a prison couldn't loosen his tongue. Sinclair spent the night in a cell, silent and unbowed, choosing jail over the truth. Then came the most chilling revelation of all. The hunters were being hunted. Walsh discovered that Sinclair had hired private detectives to shadow the senators themselves. For weeks, spies had been lurking in the corners, photographing private meetings and digging into the personal lives of the very men trying to bring him to justice. The revelation ignited a firestorm. Sinclair wasn't just dodging subpoenas, he was hunting the jury. With evidence that his spies had shadowed potential jurors, Sinclair was hit with charges of criminal contempt and jury tampering. The Teapot Dome Scandal had evolved from a backroom bribe into a full-blown assault on the American Constitution. As the Senate hearings raged, the fight escalated to the Supreme Court. The U.S. government launched a massive lawsuit to strip Sinclair and Doheny of their prizes. The argument was simple but devastating. The Teapot Dome leases weren't legitimate business deals. They were the fruit of a poisonous tree grown from fraud, secrecy, and cold, hard bribes. In 1927, the battle reached its endgame. The government's argument was surgical. Albert Fall was a bribed man, making his signatures worthless and the leases illegal. Sinclair and Doheny countered with a desperate legal technicality, arguing that even if Fall was corrupt, the contracts themselves should still stand. It was a gamble that the law could be separated from the man who broke it. The Supreme Court's answer was a thunderbolt, a unanimous no. In two landmark rulings, the justices declared the Teapot Dome leases fraudulent and void from the very beginning. It didn't matter if the oilmen claimed ignorance. The court ruled that corruption had poisoned the entire deal, giving the government the absolute right to tear up the contracts and take back its land. It was a total wipeout in the highest court. The justices established a scorched earth precedent. Any contract born of corruption is dead on arrival. The court ruled that it didn't matter if Sinclair or Doheny claimed they were innocent of the bribes. If the deal was built on a foundation of rot, the government had every right to burn it down. This victory etched a powerful weapon into American law, the principle of void ab initio. It meant these corrupt deals never legally existed in the first place. A century later, this precedent remains the gold standard, allowing the public to tear up backroom bargains and ensuring that a contract signed in shadows can never survive the light of day. But for the land itself, the Supreme Court's justice arrived far too late. While the lawyers argued, Sinclair's Mammoth Oil had been working around the clock, stripping the Teapot Dome of its riches. By the time the leases were voided, millions of barrels had already been pumped away. The government won the case, but they inherited a hollowed-out shell. In 1929, the fall of Albert Fall finally arrived. The evidence was a mountain he couldn't climb: the brown paper bag, the stacks of cash, and the sudden, impossible wealth. After years of lies, the truth was finally caught on the record. The verdict was a lightning strike. Albert Fall was found guilty and sentenced to 1 year in prison. He made history as the first cabinet member ever convicted of a crime while in office, a permanent stain on the presidency and a warning to those in power. Fall served just 9 months in a New Mexico cell before walking free for good behavior. He faded into obscurity and died in 1944, a broken man who took his secrets to the grave, still stubbornly insisting that he had done nothing wrong. Harry Sinclair walked a razor's edge. While the jury deadlocked on the conspiracy charges, his arrogance finally caught up with him. He was convicted of criminal contempt and jury tampering, proving that while he might have dodged the fraud, no one is above the law. 6 months in jail and an $8,000 fine. For Harry Sinclair, it was merely the cost of doing business. He walked out of his cell and straight back into his boardroom, his oil empire intact and his personal fortune growing larger than ever. The law had bitten, but the tycoon didn't even flinch. Then came the final shock. Edward Doheny, the man who sent the little brown bag, faced a deadlocked jury. With 8 voting guilty and 4 for acquittal, the judge declared a mistrial. Just like that, the architect of the bribe walked out of the courtroom a free man. Doheny died in 1935, one of the wealthiest men in America. His legacy lives on in Greystone Mansion, a Beverly Hills monument built with the very oil money that nearly toppled a presidency. The man was gone, but the spoils remained. Teapot Dome forever changed America. It exposed a rot in the oil industry and forced the creation of stricter campaign finance laws. Most importantly, it etched a permanent rule into our legal system that no contract built on bribery can ever truly stand. Teapot Dome didn't just teach us about justice. It taught the powerful how to survive. The players were punished, but the machine stayed in motion. The laws changed, yet the oil kept pumping and the money kept flowing. It was a lesson in how to weather the storm while the system remains exactly the same. Warren G. Harding escaped the courtroom, but not the consequences. He died in 1923, officially from a heart attack, though many believe the crushing weight of his friend's betrayal was the true cause. He died knowing he had trusted the wrong men, leaving behind a legacy shattered by a scandal he didn't live to see end. Teapot Dome wasn't an ending, it was a blueprint. It taught the nation how to steal, how to get caught, and most dangerously, how to forget. It set the stage for every modern political storm, where the headlines scream for a moment, but the deeper currents of power remain unchanged. The Teapot Dome was just the beginning of the secrets we've uncovered. Next week, we go inside the shadow empire of the man who knew everyone's secrets, J. Edgar Hoover. New documentaries drop every week. Subscribe now and never miss a story they didn't want you to find.